I'm Nima Rajan. The annual inflation rate hit 4.7% in November, and tomorrow morning we'll be getting the reading for December. Some economists are looking to see if inflation will hit 5%. Last spring, the Finance Department flagged the possibility of runaway inflation in a briefing note to Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. Most of the pressures were the result of comparing prices year over year to lows seen during the first wave of the pandemic. But officials noted that there were upside risks to the inflation outlook over the medium term. Jewish community leaders have advised Canadian synagogues to increase their vigilance. This in case of a copycat attack following a hostage-taking in Texas. Police in Canadian cities have also increased patrols around synagogues and other Jewish community buildings, although there is currently no known threat. The day-long siege at the Congregation Beth Israel Synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, ended on Saturday night after U.S. federal agents stormed the temple. The hostage-taker, a British national, was shot and killed. As Ontario and Quebec continue to dig out from a major winter storm, Environment Canada has issued snowfall, extreme cold, and winter storm warnings across the prairies. Blizzard conditions are expected in Regina and southwestern Saskatchewan this morning. Winnipeg is under a winter storm warning with 10 to 15 centimeters of fresh snow and winds gusting up to 80 kilometers an hour in the forecast. The annual pace of housing starts plunged 22% between November and December. Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation reports the drop came as the annual rate of urban starts fell 24%. This while urban starts on multiple unit housing projects dropped 29%. The pace of urban starts of single detached homes fell just 4%. A researcher is calling it a missed opportunity to help soaring numbers of people using opioids like fentanyl. A study by Unity Health and the Ontario Drug Policy Research Network finds half of Ontarians who died of an opioid overdose in the early stages of the pandemic had contact with the healthcare system in the month before their deaths. 1/4 had seen a doctor, gone to an emergency department, or had been discharged from hospital just a week before they died. Meanwhile, hospitals and health networks in Quebec are launching recruitment campaigns in Africa, Europe, and Latin America to hire nurses. But experts warn that won't change the shortages in the province. This latest pandemic wave has only worsened the nursing shortage. This comes as patient numbers rise and tens of thousands of nurses are out with COVID-19 or other illnesses or are burnt out. Any foreign nurses who are hired must pass a French test, apply to have their credentials recognized, follow an integration program, then work under supervision until they write their final exams. WestJet Airlines is cutting 20% of its February flights as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to surge. The Calgary-based airline says the move marks a response to government barriers amid the Omicron variant, which has affected staffing levels. WestJet says it will notify affected travelers in the next few days. The Citizen Lab has discovered a flaw in the app that everyone going to the Beijing Olympics has to use. It makes audio files, health and customs forms, and medical and travel history vulnerable to hackers. The Research Institute at the University of Toronto says in a worst-case scenario, the app allows someone to intercept digital traffic and record passport and medical details put into the app. Chinese state media say parcels mailed from overseas from Canada may have spread the coronavirus in Beijing and elsewhere. China's State Post Bureau says it has ordered stronger measures to ventilate and disinfect sites where items mailed from overseas are handled. Canada Post and the World Health Organization don't believe the virus can be transmitted via packaging. Global health experts say the virus mainly spreads through respiratory droplets when infected people breathe, speak, cough, and sneeze, and that coronaviruses need a live animal or human host to multiply and survive. The frigate HMCS Montreal departs Halifax on Wednesday on a 6-month deployment to the Mediterranean and Black Sea as part of NATO exercises. The Royal Canadian Navy says the operation is part of, quote, deterrence measures in Central and Eastern Europe. The ship is replacing the frigate Fredericton, which arrived back home to Halifax on Monday. Netflix is raising the cost of its most popular subscription packages again. The price for the standard plan is going up $1.50 to $16.49 per month. This while the premium package is going up $2 to $20.99. London, Ontario-based analyst Carmi Levy is wondering if Netflix is testing consumers to see just how much more it can charge. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break on Forum Daily. As COVID-19 related hospitalizations continue their steady climb across the country, there is hope that Health Canada's approval yesterday of Pfizer's antiviral COVID treatment will help ease the strain on the health system. The pill uses a combination of two antiviral drugs to prevent the virus that causes COVID-19 from replicating once it has infected a patient. But health officials stress that it is not a replacement for vaccinations. Dr. Theresa Tam, Canada's chief medical officer, noted supply of Paxlovid will be an early issue. Canada has already received its first shipment of 30,000 treatment courses. The president of Doctors of BC says her members are on the verge of a collective collapse. Dr. Ramneek Dosanjh warns it is important that everyone pay attention to this burnout among physicians. This is because if more healthcare workers are lost to it, patients will be the ones who suffer. She says heading into the pandemic's third year, doctors are emotionally exhausted and depleted. BC's provincial medical officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, yesterday extended COVID-related restrictions imposed last month on gatherings and closures of bars and fitness centers. As of today, Quebecers need to show proof of vaccination to enter liquor and cannabis stores, and the vaccine passport is being extended to big box stores next week. Students returned to their classrooms this morning, a day later than expected because of yesterday's major snowstorm. Health Minister Christian Dubé says the best thing Quebecers can do right now is to get vaccinated. An organization representing First Nations in northwestern Ontario is turning up the heat on the federal and provincial governments. This is for better fire prevention and protection funding in Indigenous communities. The call comes after 3 children died in a house fire on Friday in Sandy Lake First Nation. Anishinaabe Aski Nation's Deputy Grand Chief blames the tragedy on inadequate resources, housing, and fire protection infrastructure that don't meet national fire codes. The city of Iqaluit says a filling station with river water will be set up after traces of fuel were found in the Nunavut capital's drinking water last week. It said Iqaluit's drinking water continued to test within Canada's drinking water standards, and a do not consume order was not issued. The river water must be boiled before drinking. Last fall, the city dug up an old underground fuel tank next to the water treatment plant, which was thought to be the source of contamination. Iqaluit's residents could not drink tap water for 60 days last year after it was found to be contaminated with fuel. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says a new renewable diesel fuel and canola crushing plant announced yesterday is one of the largest investments in the province. Federated Cooperatives Limited says the estimated $2 billion integrated agriculture complex is to be built in North Regina, near the company's co-op refinery. Premier Moe calls the facility a big win for Saskatchewan workers, their families, and the economy, and also a significant win for the environment. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has tapped Energy Minister Sonia Savage to fill in as Justice Minister, now that he's asked Casey Madu to step aside. At issue is Mr. Madu's phone call to Edmonton's police chief last month, soon after he received a ticket for distracted driving. Mr. Madu, who is Black, says he phoned the chief to seek assurances that he was not being racially profiled or singled out for surveillance. Mr. Kenney says although all parties agree that Mr. Madu did not ask for his ticket to be cancelled, an independent investigator will determine whether Mr. Madu interfered in the administration of justice. A new study out of the University of British Columbia suggests cannabis is being detected in twice as many injured drivers since its 2018 legalization. Researchers analyzed blood samples from more than 4,300 moderately injured drivers who received treatment at 4 BC trauma centers between 2013 and 2020. Principal investigator Dr. Jeffrey Brubacher says before cannabis was legalized, 3.8% of injured drivers had THC concentrations above the legal driving limit of 2 nanograms per milliliter. He says that rose to 8.6% after cannabis was legalized. Canada's first woman in space is celebrating the 30th anniversary of her historic 8-day mission this Saturday. Roberta Bondar says she still thinks about the flight regularly, but not in the same way she did 3 decades ago. Ms. Bondar says the sight of Earth from space inspired her to make others see its beauty. Now a landscape photographer, she's trying to get people to appreciate the planet from the ground, the air, and from space. All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break, where we'll take a look at one organization's perspective on a new provincial tax for those who do not have the COVID-19 vaccine. Franco Terrazzano, federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joins us to discuss the proposed tax and its potential impacts amid the pandemic. As of today, Quebecers need to show proof of vaccination to enter liquor and cannabis stores. And the vaccine passport is being extended to big box stores next week. This comes after Quebec Premier François Legault announced that he plans to tax unvaccinated Quebecers if they refuse to get at least 1 dose of vaccine in the next few weeks, unless they have a medical condition associated with getting vaccinated. However, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation says Canadians don't need another tax to burden them during the pandemic. Well, joining us now to tell us more about their stance on taxing the unvaccinated is Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Now, the CTF isn't the only major organization speaking out against this. Today, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh just spoke about these taxes. He's against them as well. So what do we know so far about the Quebec government's proposed tax on the unvaccinated?
We don't have a lot of details. It seems like taxpayers may be paying it through their provincial tax filing. We don't know how much it would cost. It still seems a little half-baked. But here's what we do know. It would be a slippery slope. It would open up the floodgates to a raft of new types of taxes. And also, we're not going to tax our way out of a pandemic. And that's why you have some politicians and bureaucrats, they're trying to target Canadians. They're trying to divide Canadians, I should say. But that's why we're saying all Canadians, whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, you have to unite against this new tax.
Now, on the other hand, Premier Legault claims that this is a health contribution from the unvaccinated. So considering that the unvaccinated are more likely to need medical care, do you think this is a fair ask?
Well, this is not a health contribution. This is a new tax. I think we have to make that clear. And what the pandemic has really done, it put a spotlight on some of the issues in our government healthcare system that were going on even before COVID-19. So Canadians before the pandemic were paying more than many of our industrialized peers for healthcare, but we weren't getting the best results. We weren't getting the best results on things like acute care beds per capita or doctors per capita. There were capacity issues before the pandemic. Now, fast forward to today. The federal government has spent more than $500 billion on the pandemic. You have provincial healthcare budgets in total, nearly $400 billion since 2020. So I think that leaves us with two crucial questions. First is, well, how many hundreds of billions of dollars do taxpayers need to fork over before our healthcare system is not on the brink of collapse? And second, well, when are these politicians and bureaucrats who haven't missed a paycheck, who are getting six-figure taxpayer funded salaries, when are they going to be held accountable for their failure to come up with better solutions?
And it's interesting that the CTF is calling on all Canadians, vaccinated and unvaccinated, to unite and speak out against this tax. Why should all Canadians care about this?
Particularly if you're vaccinated, you should stand up against this. Some politicians, they want the unvaccinated to pay more today, but who are they going to come after tomorrow? We have to remember that there's a lot of actions that we take in our day-to-day lives that could put us in the hospital. And here's some examples. If you put a little bit too much butter on your popcorn, are you going to have to send the government a check? If you're like me and you ate way too much over the holidays, put on a bit too much weight, are you going to get a tax bill for that? But what about your kids or your your grandkids, if they fall off their bike trying a new jump, is a tax bill going to come with stitches? So really, we see this as a very slippery slope, and that's why all Canadian taxpayers need to unite against this new tax.
So considering that this is a pandemic-related tax, sir, how much extra or new taxes have Canadians already paid during the pandemic itself?
Well, Canadians are already overtaxed. Just think about all the taxes that we have to pay. You got income taxes, business taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, import taxes, carbon taxes, you name it, taxpayers pay it. And even in the pandemic, the average family's budget, 36% of it goes to taxes. And that's more than what the average Canadian family pays on the necessities like food, shelter, and clothing combined.
All right, sir, just about a minute left here. So how can Canadians hold their politicians and bureaucrats accountable as the CTF is calling for them to do?
Well, I think you have to call your politicians, specifically your premier, and tell them that you will not tolerate any new type of tax. And what's so concerning is that this is following a trend from some of our governments here, where their only solution, so-called, it seems like, is to hammer Canadians with a higher tax bill, right? Some politicians want Canadians to drive fewer trucks, so they hammer us with a carbon tax. When carbon taxes don't work, they hammer us with higher carbon tax. To address housing prices, you have these bureaucrats funding reports to hit us with a new home tax. So this is following a very clear but disturbing trend.
Some food for thought there, sir. Thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Well, thanks for having me on.
We'll be right back after the break with a look at news from around the world as the European Parliament elects a new president and Russia redeploys troops from its Far East to the West. We'll be back. The European Union's Parliament has elected its new president in Roberta Metsola of Malta. The Christian Democrat received most of the 616 votes cast on Tuesday. She succeeds Italian socialist David Sassoli, who died last week. The election means 3 of the 4 biggest jobs in the 27-nation bloc are now held by women, with Ursula von der Leyen serving as president of the EU's Executive Commission and Christine Lagarde running the European Central Bank. Russia is sending troops from the country's Far East to Belarus for major war games to practice a joint response to external threats. The deputy defense minister isn't saying how many troops and weapons are being redeployed, but deployment would dramatically boost an estimated 100,000 troops that Russia already has positioned near Ukraine in what the West fears could lead to an invasion. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly is in Ukraine for meetings with the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister and is also set to meet with Canadian troops who are helping to train Ukraine's security forces. Tonga's government is confirming 3 deaths from Saturday's massive undersea volcanic explosion. These include 2 local residents and a British woman. In its first update since the eruption, the government says it remains concerned about the fate of people on 2 hard-hit smaller islands. Most houses on those islands were destroyed. On the main island, the biggest problem is that ash has contaminated the rainwater that people require for drinking water. New Zealand's military is sending fresh water and other supplies, but the ash covering Tonga's main runway will delay the flight at least another day. The airline industry is raising the stakes in a showdown with AT&T and Verizon over the telecom company's plan to launch new 5G wireless service this week. They are warning that thousands of flights could be grounded or delayed if the rollout takes place near major airports. CEOs of the United States' largest airlines said Monday that interference from the wireless service on a key instrument on planes is worse than they originally thought. Israel says it has successfully tested a system designed to intercept ballistic missiles outside the Earth's atmosphere. The Aero weapons system is part of an array of missile defenses that Israel has developed in recent years. This is to protect itself in any future conflict with arch-enemy Iran or regional militant groups such as Lebanese Hezbollah or the Palestinian Hamas in the Gaza Strip, which are both allies of Iran. The Defense Ministry said on Tuesday that the system detected the target and fired 2 Aero 3 interceptors at it, calling the mission a success. The European Union's foreign policy chief says Sudan's military rulers have shown an unwillingness to negotiate a peaceful settlement to the country's ongoing crisis. Tuesday's comments by EU Foreign Affairs Chief Josep Borrell came a day after security forces opened fire on anti-coup protesters in the capital, killing at least 7 people. Mr. Borrell says the ongoing crackdown since the October 25th military coup has put the country on a dangerous path away from peace and stability. The coup upended Sudan's transition to democratic rule after 3 decades of repression and international isolation under autocratic President Omar al-Bashir. Hong Kong is going to kill about 2,000 small animals after several hamsters tested positive for COVID-19 at a pet store where an employee had the virus. All pet stores must stop selling hamsters, and the city will also ban the import of small mammals. U.S. officials say animals do not appear to play a significant role in spreading COVID-19, but Hong Kong authorities aren't ruling out transmission between animals and humans. Hong Kong Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals is shocked and concerned by the decision to kill the animals, and it is urging the government not to take any drastic action before reviewing its approach. NASA says an asteroid more than twice the size of the Empire State Building was set to make its closest approach to Earth for the next 200 years today. The near-Earth object was set to have flown past Earth at 4:51 p.m. Eastern Time at a speed of more than 70,000 kilometers an hour. The asteroid is about 1,000 meters in diameter. University of Toronto travel medicine expert Dr. Aisha Khatib is talking about delivering a baby at 35,000 feet. Dr. Khatib was on the final leg of her trip from Toronto to Entebbe, Uganda last month when the flight crew asked if there were any medical personnel on the plane. She and 2 other medical workers came forward and delivered a baby girl. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.